Welcome. Today, one Bumpy Johnson's own men heard what the KKK did to 11 victims one of his strongest enforcers couldn't even stand. You're about to hear the full story, and it's worse than you can imagine. We're diving into one of the most chilling true crime stories ever. Bumpy Johnson heard firsthand what the KKK did to 11 victims, and even one of his toughest enforcers couldn't handle it. Before we jump in, I want to know, where are you watching from today? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because hours of real research went into uncovering this shocking story. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another name in Harlem. He was a force that commanded respect and fear alike. From his early days, it was clear that he had a mind for strategy and an instinct for survival that set him apart from every other gangster in the neighborhood. People didn't just follow him because of muscle. They followed him because he understood the streets in a way no one else did. His reputation began to grow quietly at first, but soon everyone in Harlem knew that Bumpy Johnson was a man you couldn't ignore. He built his empire by carefully balancing power and influence. Unlike other criminals who relied purely on violence, Johnson combined brains with brawn. He understood alliances, rivalries, and the delicate politics of the underworld. While others would rush into confrontations, Bumpy always calculated his moves, making sure each decision strengthened his position. This careful planning made him untouchable to many, even when the law tried to catch him or rival gangs plotted against him. Johnson's influence wasn't limited to the criminal underworld. He had deep connections with politicians, business owners, and even law enforcement. These connections weren't just for show. They were tools that allowed him to operate with a level of freedom others could only dream of. In a city where power often shifted violently, Johnson maintained control by being both respected and feared, a rare combination that made him legendary. What set him apart was his code of loyalty. His crew knew that he would protect them, and in return, they followed him without question. This loyalty wasn't blind. It was earned through fairness, strategy, and the knowledge that crossing Bumpy Johnson was a mistake no one survived. Even rival gangsters admitted that Bumpy Johnson was a different breed, someone who combined street smarts with a sense of order in a world full of chaos. Despite the violent environment he thrived in, Bumpy had a certain charisma. People wanted to be around him, whether for protection, business, or just the magnetism he carried. He could command a room with a look or a single word, and his presence alone was often enough to shift the balance of power in Harlem. It was this combination of strategy, influence, and personality that made him one of the most powerful figures the city had ever seen. Even in the face of law enforcement and the constant threat of rival gangs, Bumpy Johnson remained untouchable. Arrests and raids came and went, but he always seemed to stay one step ahead. His knowledge of the streets, combined with his careful planning, made him nearly impossible to capture or destroy. For the people of Harlem, he became a symbol of strength, both feared and admired, a man who could survive anything the city threw at him. By the time he was fully established as Harlem's kingpin, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster, he was a legend. His name carried weight not only in the criminal underworld, but in the city as a whole. People whispered about him in awe. Enemies plotted cautiously. And even those outside of crime circles recognized that Bumpy Johnson had a power that was as much about intelligence and respect as it was about force. His role as Harlem's powerful gangster was solidified, and his legacy would echo long after his time on the streets ended. The story of the KKK's actions against 11 victims is one of the most brutal and chilling episodes of that era. These weren't just random acts of violence. They were carefully orchestrated to instill fear in entire communities. The victims, innocent civilians, were chosen in a way that sent a message to anyone who dared to resist or stand against the KKK's ideology. The sheer cruelty of their methods made it clear that the perpetrators wanted more than just control. They wanted to terrorize, humiliate, dominate. What makes this story particularly horrifying is that it was witnessed, at least indirectly, by Bumpy Johnson and his men. The KKK operated with a level of confidence and impunity that was terrifying. No one dared confront them openly, which allowed their violence to unfold with shocking precision. The 11 victims suffered in ways that were meant to break their spirits completely, and the chaos left behind was enough to make even hardened criminals shudder. Each act of brutality was a calculated display of power. The KKK knew how to strike fear, not just in the individuals targeted, but across entire neighborhoods. By targeting these 11 victims, they were sending a clear warning to anyone who opposed them. Defiance would be met with merciless punishment. The victims' families and communities were traumatized, and the repercussions would echo far beyond that single event. Bumpy Johnson's men, who were usually exposed to violence, were deeply affected by what they learned. Even for seasoned enforcers, hearing about the methods the KKK used was almost too much to bear. One enforcer in particular was so overwhelmed by the horror that he physically broke down. This reaction highlighted just how extreme and inhuman the KKK's actions were, even against individuals who had seen the worst of street life. Nothing prepared them for this level of cruelty. The incident didn't just affect those directly involved. It created an atmosphere of dread that spread through Harlem. Rumors and accounts of the KKK's actions circulated quickly, magnifying the fear. People realized that even someone as powerful as Bumpy Johnson couldn't immediately stop what had been done. This awareness made the stakes higher and the tension in the streets more intense. Every move had to be calculated, and even the strongest had to acknowledge the severity of the threat. The community's reaction was a mix of outrage, fear, and helplessness. While some wanted revenge, most understood that the KKK's power extended beyond simple retaliation. Bumpy Johnson himself had to weigh the consequences carefully. Any direct confrontation could trigger more violence and put more innocent lives at risk. This careful calculation further demonstrated his leadership and understanding of power in a world where brutality could come from any direction. In the end, the story of the 11 victims serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which hatred and prejudice can go. It's a brutal chapter in history, one that even Bumpy Johnson and his hardened men couldn't ignore. Their reactions, particularly the enforcer who broke down, highlight how extreme and terrifying the events were. It wasn't just a story of crime. It was a story of terror, power, and the human cost of unchecked hatred. The aftermath of the KKK's brutality wasn't something that could be ignored. Even though Bumpy Johnson himself didn't witness every act firsthand, his men were present in Harlem and heard the horrifying accounts of what had taken place. These stories came through whispers on the streets, frantic reports from terrified citizens, and the fearful reactions of those who had narrowly escaped. For Johnson's crew, this wasn't just information. They were experiencing a wave of fear and tension that hung heavy over the neighborhood. For seasoned enforcers used to violence and crime, the details of the KKK's actions were almost unbelievable. They had dealt with rival gangs, shootings, and intimidation before, but the scale and cruelty of what happened to the 11 victims was on a different level. Hearing about it created a sense of unease that spread quickly among Bumpy's men. Even the toughest enforcers found themselves shaken, realizing that this wasn't ordinary street violence. They were dealing with a deeply organized and merciless force. Bumpy Johnson himself understood the weight of what his men were experiencing. He knew that in order to maintain control and order, he had to manage not only the streets but the morale of his crew. Fear was contagious, and in the aftermath of such brutality, it could easily spiral into panic or rash decisions. Johnson's ability to keep his men focused while still processing the horrors they had heard showcased the depth of his leadership and the respect he commanded. Some of his men took it upon themselves to investigate, gathering fragmented reports and listening carefully to eyewitness accounts. They pieced together what had happened, trying to understand the methods used by the KKK and the full scope of the violence. Even without seeing every act, the information they gathered painted a picture so grim that it left them questioning how anyone could survive such an ordeal. The intensity of the aftermath forced them to confront the raw reality of the world outside their own criminal operations. The psychological impact on Johnson's crew was profound. One enforcer, known for his stoicism and resilience, reportedly broke down completely upon hearing the full story. For men accustomed to the harshest realities of street life, this reaction underscored just how extreme the KKK's violence had been. It wasn't just a moment of shock, it was a reminder that no amount of street experience could fully prepare someone for calculated acts of terror on innocent civilians. The community around Harlem also reacted strongly to what Johnson's men reported. Word spread quickly, fueling fear, anger, and anxiety. Families were on edge, and even those who weren't directly affected felt the tension radiating through the neighborhood. Bumpy Johnson and his crew had to navigate this delicate environment carefully. They couldn't act recklessly, or the consequences might escalate, but they also couldn't ignore the situation, knowing that the reputation of his leadership and the safety of Harlem were at stake. Ultimately, the aftermath of the KKK's actions left a lasting mark on Johnson's crew and the wider community. It wasn't just a story of crime. It was a story of terror, power, and human resilience. Hearing about the events forced Bumpy Johnson's men to face a reality that even they weren't fully prepared for. Their reactions, fear, and determination to maintain control in the face of such brutality highlight the complexity of leadership, loyalty, and survival in a world where true danger often came from unexpected sources. Even among Bumpy Johnson's crew, who had seen their fair share of violence and chaos, there were limits to what a human being could endure. The enforcer in question had built a reputation as one of the toughest, most unshakable members of Johnson's inner circle. He had faced rival gangs, deadly shootouts, and countless acts of street brutality without flinching. But what he witnessed, or rather, what he heard about, the KKK's actions against 11 victims, pushed him beyond the edge of human endurance. When news reached him, the details were so horrifying that his body physically reacted. According to accounts, he ran outside, vomiting from the sheer shock of it all. For someone so hardened, this was not weakness. It was a natural human reaction to extreme trauma. The level of cruelty and inhumanity involved in the KKK's acts was something no one could easily process, not even the most seasoned enforcer. His reaction highlighted the scale of the horror and sent a chilling message to everyone around him. Bumpy Johnson watched this unfold with a mixture of concern and understanding. He knew that fear and trauma were part of the job. This was beyond the normal bounds of street life. Johnson had always been a leader who commanded loyalty not through intimidation alone, but by understanding the limits of his men. Seeing his enforcer break down was a stark reminder that even his strongest allies were human, that some forms of violence could shake anyone to their core. The enforcer's reaction also served as a sobering reality check for the rest of the crew. Always prided themselves on their ability to handle danger. But this event forced them to confront something bigger than themselves. The KKK's brutality wasn't just another gang rivalry or a violent scheme. It was a calculated, merciless force that could strip even the toughest street warriors of their composure. This realization left a lasting impression on Johnson's men, reminding them of the unpredictable nature of power and terror. For the enforcer himself, the aftermath was difficult to process. He became quieter, more cautious, and more aware of the weight of the world outside their usual operations. Even within the crew, his breakdown was discussed quietly, without mockery or ridicule, because everyone understood the gravity of the situation. In a sense, it created a new level of respect for the power and danger they were up against, reinforcing the seriousness of the environment in which they operated. The event also underscored Bumpy Johnson's leadership style. He didn't punish vulnerability, but rather used it as a moment to teach, guide, and maintain cohesion within his crew. He understood that keeping his men focused and functional in the face of extreme events required empathy, strategy, and control. The enforcer's reaction, while shocking, ultimately strengthened the crew's unity, showing them that even the strongest among them were human and needed guidance in navigating extreme danger. Ultimately, the story of the enforcer who broke down became part of the legend surrounding Bumpy Johnson and his inner circle. It highlighted both the unimaginable cruelty of the KKK and the human limits of those who lived on the streets. For the viewers, this moment serves as a chilling reminder that even the toughest men can be shaken by the horrors of the world, and that leadership, loyalty, and resilience are constantly tested in ways that go far beyond ordinary violence. Harlem during this period was a city on edge. The streets were alive with rumors, whispers, and a tension that could be felt in every corner. Residents didn't just fear the usual gang conflicts, they were now confronted with the terrifying reality of the KKK's unchecked brutality. Every conversation seemed to carry an undertone of dread, and even ordinary daily activities were shadowed by the fear that something horrifying could happen at any moment. The fear wasn't just emotional, it was physical. People walked cautiously, eyes constantly scanning for danger, and entire blocks would go quiet if something seemed out of place. Parents warned their children to stay close. Shopkeepers locked doors earlier than usual, and groups of men patrolled the streets more vigilantly. The aura of dread wasn't limited to the KKK's immediate victims. It spread like wildfire, affecting everyone in the neighborhood. Bumpy Johnson and his men were acutely aware of this tension. They moved through Harlem with a sense of purpose, knowing that their presence had to maintain order while also commanding respect. Johnson understood that fear could be a tool. It could also be destabilizing. Too much panic, and even his loyal crew might make mistakes. Balancing the natural fear among his people with strategic control became a crucial part of his leadership during this period. For the residents, hearing that even Bumpy Johnson's men were shaken added another layer of anxiety. If the toughest enforcers on the streets could be unnerved, it was a stark reminder that no one was truly safe. This psychological impact reinforced the KKK's intended message power through terror. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, with every corner and alleyway carrying the weight of potential violence. Despite the fear, there was also a sense of resilience. Harlem wasn't going to be completely subdued, and the community relied on leaders like Johnson to navigate the chaos. His ability to maintain calm among his crew and to project strength to the neighborhood became a stabilizing force. While the fear was real, it was tempered by the knowledge that Johnson's influence provided some form of protection from total anarchy. The tension also influenced decision-making on both sides of the conflict. Johnson had to carefully calculate his actions, knowing that any rash move could escalate violence and put more lives at risk. Similarly, the KKK's intimidation relied on this tension, counting on the community's fear to amplify the impact of their crimes. Harlem became a city where strategy and fear were intertwined. Every action observed, analyzed, and reacted to. Ultimately, the fear and tension in Harlem during this time weren't just the product of isolated acts of violence. They were a reflection of the power dynamics, the brutality of the KKK, and the fragile balance maintained by Bumpy Johnson and his men. It was a community living under constant pressure, yet resilient enough to endure, adapt, and survive. For anyone hearing this story today, it's a vivid reminder of how fear can shape a neighborhood and test the limits of leadership, loyalty, and courage. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a man of muscle, he was a man of strategy. From the streets of Harlem to the hidden corners of the city's criminal underworld, every move he made was carefully calculated. He understood that power wasn't just about fear. It was about influence, intelligence, and knowing when to act. Johnson treated every alliance, every confrontation, and every decision as a chess move, always thinking several steps ahead of his rivals. He built his network strategically, surrounding himself with men who were both loyal and capable. Each member of his crew had a role. Each was chosen not just for strength, but for skill, intelligence, and reliability. This created a tight, knit group that could execute complex plans, enforce his authority, and adapt to unexpected challenges. Johnson's strategy relied on having the right people in the right positions, making his power more resilient than that of typical street gangs. Part of his approach involved careful observation and understanding of his opponents. Bumpy studied rival gang leaders, politicians, even law enforcement officials, learning their habits, weaknesses, and motivations. This knowledge allowed him to anticipate threats before they materialized and to use opportunities to his advantage. By staying one step ahead, Johnson could turn potential challenges into advantages, reinforcing his dominance in Harlem. Johnson also understood the importance of perception. To the outside world, he needed to appear untouchable, unflinching, and in control at all times. Even in situations where he might have been vulnerable, he projected confidence and authority, ensuring that both allies and rivals respected him. This psychological aspect of power was as important to him as physical strength, as it discouraged challenges and maintained his position at the top. Another key part of his strategy was balance. While he relied on fear and intimidation, he also knew when to show fairness and loyalty. His crew and community saw him not only as a ruthless gangster, but as a leader who protected his own and maintained a sense of order. This balance between toughness and reliability made his authority more sustainable, as it was based not just on fear, but also on trust and calculated influence. Bumpy's strategic approach extended to how he handled crises. In moments of tension or danger, he didn't react impulsively. He assessed the situation, considered the consequences, and then acted decisively. This ability to remain calm and calculated, even under extreme pressure, was a hallmark of his leadership. It allowed him to navigate the chaos of Harlem streets while maintaining control over his empire and keeping his crew aligned. Ultimately, Johnson's strategic approach to power was what separated him from other gangsters of his time. He combined intelligence, observation, planning, and perception to create a level of authority that was nearly untouchable. His success wasn't just measured by fear or dominance. It was measured by his ability to maintain control, anticipate threats, and inspire loyalty in those who followed him. For anyone studying the dynamics of power in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson's methods remain a masterclass in strategic leadership. The KKK's intimidation tactics were designed to control, terrorize, and dominate communities through fear. These weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully planned to send a message to anyone who dared challenge their power. The mere presence of the Klan in neighborhoods like Harlem created an atmosphere of tension, where people felt they were constantly being watched and could be targeted at any moment. Their goal was not just to punish individuals, to instill fear in entire communities. Their methods were brutal and psychological. The KKK would use public displays of violence to maximize impact, often making sure that news of their actions spread quickly. Word of mouth, rumors, and eyewitness accounts amplified the terror, ensuring that even those who weren't directly affected felt vulnerable. This strategy of intimidation extended beyond physical harm. It was about controlling the minds of people and demonstrating that resistance came at an extreme cost. Bumpy Johnson and his crew quickly recognized the KKK's tactics for what they were: a combination of psychological warfare and brutal enforcement. Unlike ordinary criminal rivals, the Klan operated with a mix of fear, secrecy, and public spectacle. By hearing and witnessing the aftermath, Johnson's men realized that their usual street smarts wouldn't be enough to predict or counter these tactics. The KKK's ability to manipulate fear was as powerful as their capacity for violence. Intimidation was also strategic. The KKK often targeted those in leadership positions, individuals with influence, or anyone who might inspire resistance. Focusing on key figures, they sent a message that no one was immune and that standing up against them could be deadly. Even the strongest members of Harlem's criminal underworld had to take note of these threats, understanding that defiance carried real consequences. The use of symbolism amplified their power. The hoods, robes, and torches weren't just for show. They represented a collective, terrifying presence that made their victims feel isolated and powerless. These symbols, combined with their violent acts, created a psychological grip on the community. Every sighting, every rumor, every whispered account reinforced the notion that the KKK was omnipresent and unstoppable. Despite the terror, Bumpy Johnson maintained a careful balance. He didn't allow the fear to cripple his crew or his operations. Instead, he used knowledge of the KKK's tactics to anticipate their moves and protect his people when possible. Understanding the methods of intimidation allowed him to respond with strategy rather than reaction, keeping his influence intact while avoiding unnecessary conflict that could put his men or the community at risk. Ultimately, the KKK's intimidation tactics were as much about perception as they were about action. The fear they generated often accomplished more than the acts themselves, shaping decisions, movements, and the psyche of the neighborhoods they targeted. For Bumpy Johnson in Harlem, navigating these threats required a combination of courage, intelligence, and vigilance. It was a constant test of leadership, resilience, and the ability to maintain control in an environment dominated by terror. Bumpy Johnson was known not just for his power, but for the loyalty he inspired in his crew. Unlike many gang leaders who ruled through fear alone, Johnson built relationships based on trust and mutual respect. His men knew that he had their backs, no matter the situation. This loyalty was not blind. It was earned through years of proving that he would protect his people and reward their dedication. Every member of his crew understood that working for Bumpy Johnson meant more than just carrying out orders. It meant being part of a family. Johnson recognized the strengths and weaknesses of each man and placed them in roles where they could excel. He ensured that everyone felt valued and respected, and this created a sense of loyalty that went beyond fear. His men were willing to take risks and face dangers they might otherwise avoid, simply because they trusted him completely. Even in the most dangerous moments, such as when the KKK's brutality reached Harlem, Johnson's loyalty to his crew never wavered. He made it clear that their safety and well-being were a priority. if someone was shaken by what they witnessed or heard. Like the enforcer who broke down, Johnson didn't punish them, he supported them, offering guidance and reassurance. This approach strengthened the bond between leader and crew, making them more unified and effective. Bumpy's loyalty wasn't limited to protection, it extended to rewards and opportunities. Those who demonstrated dedication and skill were recognized and compensated, which encouraged continued commitment. Johnson understood that loyalty was reciprocal. The more he invested in his men, the stronger and more resilient his organization became. This created a team that was willing to go to great lengths to uphold his reputation and execute his strategies. The loyalty of his crew also served as a buffer against external threats. Rival gangs, law enforcement, and organizations like the KKK quickly learned that crossing Bumpy Johnson meant facing not just him, but an entire unit of men who were fiercely devoted. This cohesion made his operation incredibly difficult to disrupt, as the loyalty among his men ensured that information, resources, and protection were tightly controlled. Johnson's leadership style cultivated loyalty through example. He led from the front, took responsibility for mistakes, and ensured that his men understood the value of discipline, honor, and respect. His crew didn't just fear him, they admired him. Admiration, combined with strategic protection and careful reward, reinforced the loyalty that became the backbone of his power in Harlem. Ultimately, Bumpy Johnson's loyalty to his crew was a defining factor in his success. It allowed him to maintain control in a chaotic and dangerous environment, build a respected and effective organization, and navigate the threats posed by rival gangs, the KKK, and the pressures of Harlem's streets. His ability to inspire trust and loyalty wasn't just a leadership trait, it was a survival strategy that ensured his legacy would endure long after his time. The brutality inflicted by the KKK didn't just affect the immediate victims, it sent shockwaves throughout the entire Harlem community. Families, neighbors, and even casual onlookers were struck by fear and disbelief. People whispered in hushed tones, wondering who might be next and whether anyone could protect them from such unrelenting violence. The events became a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the terrifying reach of organized hate. Community members responded in a variety of ways. Some became more cautious, locking their doors early, keeping children indoors, and avoiding areas perceived as dangerous. Others felt a deep sense of outrage and helplessness, frustrated by their inability to prevent such atrocities. The mixture of fear and anger created an atmosphere of tension, where every interaction was influenced by the recent events and the looming threat of further violence. Many looked to local leaders, including Bumpy Johnson, for guidance and protection. Johnson's presence in Harlem was a source of reassurance, as he was widely respected and feared by both criminals and civilians. People trusted that his influence could help shield them from some of the chaos. His ability to maintain order and demonstrate strength in the face of such terror played a crucial role in calming the community, even if only partially. The community also rallied in subtle ways. Neighbors checked on each other, shared information about potential threats, and kept watch over their blocks. While the KKK aimed to isolate and intimidate, These acts of solidarity became small yet powerful forms of resistance. It was a quiet reminder that even in the face of extreme fear, people could support one another and maintain a sense of cohesion in their neighborhoods. However, the psychological impact of the brutality lingered. People became hyper, aware of their surroundings, and distrust seeped into daily life. Rumors and stories of the KKK's actions spread quickly, amplifying the sense of danger. Even those who were not directly affected felt the weight of the events, and every encounter carried the possibility of harm. This widespread anxiety changed the way the community moved, interacted, and planned their daily lives. Despite the fear, some in the community began to channel their outrage into resilience. The knowledge of the KKK's cruelty reinforced the need for leaders like Johnson and the importance of maintaining vigilance. Residents learned to navigate a world where threats were real and unpredictable, and the combination of respect for strong leaders and community solidarity became a survival mechanism in these tense times. Ultimately, the community's reaction to the brutality highlighted both the power of fear and the strength of unity. While the KKK sought to terrorize and control, the people of Harlem demonstrated resilience and reliance on their leaders and neighbors. This complex response, fear, vigilance, solidarity, and adaptation, painted a vivid picture of life in Harlem during one of its most dangerous periods, set the stage for how Bumpy Johnson and his crew would navigate the challenges ahead. Bumpy Johnson's ability to maintain respect and authority in Harlem wasn't simply the result of fear or violence. It was the result of careful strategy, consistency, and the perception of strength. From the very beginning, he understood that people followed those they respected, not just those they feared. His reputation as a calculated and intelligent leader made him stand out from other gangsters who relied purely on intimidation. People knew that crossing Johnson carried consequences, but they also knew that he operated with a code that balanced toughness with fairness. Respect for Johnson was earned over years of action, claimed through words. Every decision he made, whether in business, street operations, or community interactions, reinforced the idea that he was someone who could be trusted to lead effectively. By demonstrating competence and foresight, he showed that he wasn't just powerful, he was capable of maintaining order and protecting those under his influence. This balance of power and competence was central to his authority. Authority, however, required more than just skill, it required visibility. Johnson made sure that his presence was felt throughout Harlem. He was seen, heard, and recognized as someone who controlled his territory. Whether he was negotiating alliances, addressing conflicts, or simply walking through the streets, people understood that he was the man in charge. This visibility reinforced his authority and discouraged challenges, as no one could easily question his control without facing repercussions. Johnson's respect extended beyond his immediate crew. Even rival gang members and outsiders acknowledged his power, understanding that he operated on a level above typical street leaders. His strategic mind, combined with a reputation for fairness to those who followed the rules, made him a figure both feared and admired. This dual perception amplified his authority, as people were drawn to his leadership, while simultaneously cautious not to provoke him. Consistency played a crucial role in maintaining his influence. Johnson's crew and community members could predict how he would react to situations based on past behavior. This predictability built trust, even in a violent world where unpredictability was common. People respected him because they knew he didn't act recklessly, that his decisions were always calculated to maintain order, loyalty, and control. Another aspect of his authority came from how he handled crisis. Even in moments of extreme danger, the aftermath of the KKK's brutality, Johnson remained calm, decisive, and in control. His ability to navigate chaos without panic reassured his crew and the community alike. It sent a message that he was not only powerful, but reliable, a man whose judgment could be trusted under any circumstances. Ultimately, Bumpy Johnson's respect and authority were the product of a combination of intelligence, strategy, consistency, and leadership. He maintained control not through random displays of violence, but through deliberate actions that inspired loyalty, commanded fear, reinforced trust. For anyone studying the dynamics of power in Harlem, his methods remain a masterclass in how to maintain dominance while balancing fear, respect, and strategy. Bumpy Johnson's influence didn't end with his own time on the streets. It reshaped Harlem's criminal landscape for decades to come. His methods, his alliances, and the respect he commanded created a structure that others would follow long after he was gone. Johnson showed that power could be maintained not just through fear, but through intelligence, loyalty, and calculated strategy, leaving a blueprint for future gang leaders. One of the most significant impacts was the way he organized his crew and territory. Johnson established clear hierarchies and defined roles within his organization, which allowed operations to run smoothly and efficiently. This level of structure was unusual at the time and became a model for later criminal enterprises in Harlem. It proved that careful planning and discipline could sustain a gang's influence over a community for years. His interactions with rival gangs also left a lasting impression. By balancing confrontation with negotiation, Johnson demonstrated that territorial disputes didn't always have to end in bloodshed. This approach influenced future leaders, showing them that strategic thinking and alliances could be more powerful than sheer force. His reputation alone often prevented conflicts, giving his successors a level of control that would have been impossible without his legacy. Johnson's role in maintaining order also impacted the wider community. Even as a gangster, he enforced certain boundaries and rules that kept random violence in check, which allowed some neighborhoods to function despite the dangers around them. Residents came to understand that, in some twisted way, Johnson's presence brought a measure of stability. This balance between fear and protection became part of the criminal culture he left behind. Myth and legend of Bumpy Johnson amplified his lasting impact. Stories of his clever tactics, ruthless efficiency, and loyalty spread throughout Harlem and beyond, shaping the way people viewed organized crime. New generations of criminals studied his methods, consciously or unconsciously, and tried to emulate his combination of respect, fear, and strategy. His name became synonymous with power and influence in the streets. Even law enforcement learned from his example. Johnson's ability to stay one step ahead forced authorities to adapt their approach to organized crime. They realized that conventional policing methods were often ineffective against leaders who combined intelligence with loyalty. And this understanding would shape policing strategies in Harlem and other urban areas for years. Ultimately, the lasting impact of Bumpy Johnson on Harlem's criminal landscape is undeniable. He didn't just dominate his era, he redefined it. Through careful strategy, strong alliances, loyalty, and calculated displays of power, he left behind a model of leadership that would influence gangs, communities, and even law enforcement for decades. His legacy was more than his crimes. It was the structure, influence, and respect he commanded in a world where chaos was the norm. Bumpy Johnson's legacy is one of complexity, blending fear, respect, and admiration in equal measure. To the streets of Harlem, he was a symbol of power and control, a man whose name alone commanded attention. Yet, beneath the reputation of a ruthless gangster was a figure who understood loyalty, strategy, and the intricate balance of influence. His actions left a mark not just on the criminal world, but on the entire community he navigated. Many remember Johnson primarily for the fear he inspired. Rivals, law enforcement, and even ordinary citizens knew that crossing him came with serious consequences. His ability to maintain control over Harlem was unmatched, and his reputation as untouchable was cemented through both action and perception. This fear wasn't arbitrary. It was a tool he wielded wisely, ensuring that his crew remained disciplined and that rivals hesitated before challenging him. At the same time, Johnson earned profound respect. His crew trusted him with their lives, knowing he would protect them and reward loyalty. Even rival gangs recognized his intelligence and strategic mind, understanding that he was more than just muscle. He commanded authority through both skill and presence, showing that respect could coexist with fear. True power often required more than brute force. Johnson's influence extended beyond crime. In a neighborhood where fear often dominated, he brought a measure of order. While his methods were extreme, his strategic approach to leadership meant that his actions shaped the community in ways that went beyond intimidation. Residents often knew where boundaries were and understood that his presence, as paradoxical as it may seem, maintained a form of stability in Harlem's turbulent environment. The stories and legends surrounding Johnson further solidified his complex legacy. Tales of his cunning, his loyalty, and his dealings with both allies and enemies spread throughout Harlem and beyond. These stories, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes factual, painted him as a figure larger than life, a man capable of both ruthless violence and measured leadership. This duality made him a subject of fascination and analysis for decades to come. Even decades after his death, Johnson's name continues to resonate. Scholars, filmmakers, and historians examine his life, not simply to glorify crime, but to understand the nuances of power, leadership, survival in an urban environment dominated by systemic challenges and street violence. His story serves as a case study in the ways fear, respect, and strategy intersect to create influence that endures beyond one lifetime. Ultimately, Bumpy Johnson's legacy is a testament to the complexity of human influence. He was feared, respected, admired, and criticized, all at the same time. His life illustrates that true leadership, especially in extreme circumstances, is rarely simple. It requires balancing power with loyalty, fear with respect, and strategy with instinct. For Harlem, and for anyone studying the dynamics of control and reputation, Bumpy Johnson remains an unforgettable figure whose legacy continues to shape perceptions of leadership and authority to this day.